Welcome back to Heritage HQ and our latest Heritage Live. Today's guest is biologist, naturalist, Heritage Expedition, Sub-Antarctic guide extraordinaire Andrew Given. Andy, as he's known to his friends, has studied breeding behaviour in seabirds, has a PhD in gull evolution and population genetics, and extensive fieldwork in migratory shorebird research in New Zealand and around the world. We are super excited to have Andy back as a lecturer and guide again this summer. Welcome, Andy. Good to see you, my friend, and thanks for joining us. It's fantastic to have you here today and joining us again for another Subantarctic island hopping season.
Thanks, Isaac. It's good to always good to be able to talk about the Subantarctic. It's a topic I'm always very happy to chat about, and certainly one of my favourite parts of the world. So thanks very much.
No worries. Right, let's get into it. As always, we'll loop back to you guys if you have any questions. So question away, and we'll come back to them in the end. For those unfamiliar with the Subantarctic Islands, where are they and why are they so important?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, because when I talk to people about going to the Subantarctic, they, even New Zealanders would, many of them don't sort of have a clue what these islands actually are. So I guess in simple terms, they're the islands that are south of New Zealand, but sort of north of the Antarctic Circle. Those are the New Zealand Subantarctic Islands, but obviously there are Subantarctic Islands all around. So there are ones in the southern Indian Ocean, the southern Atlantic, but we're talking about the southern Pacific, New Zealand Subantarctic Islands. Now, I guess there's one little disclaimer there. You can see on the map there, we've got the Snares, the Auckland Islands, Campbell Island. We've also got the Antipodes and the Bounty Islands, which are further east. And those are the New Zealand Subantarctic Islands. And then we've got Macquarie Island, which is unfortunately Australian, but really sort of regarded as sort of part of that group of Subantarctic Islands. And one that I guess, we sort of sometimes like to claim as our own as well.
Exactly, and I think we'll touch on that a bit more later on.
Yeah.
So summer in the subs, does it get any better?
Well, I don't think it does. I mean, I've spent the last 3 summers down in the Subantarctic. I've had 3 Christmases, all of them actually on Campbell Island. So I think it's the best place to be in the middle of summer. Certainly from a Subantarctic perspective, it's obviously the time of year where we have long days down there. It's the time of year where we're going to get the best weather down there. And it's also the time of year where things are happening. So our plants are flowering, our animals are breeding. So it's certainly the time when we've got the most activity going on in those regions. So that's the reason why Heritage is down there in the middle of summer, I guess.
Excellent. Yeah, it certainly makes it more pleasant, and it can be. You can get some quite temperamental days down there anyway, being in the Southern Ocean, even during summer.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing that people often ask. They sort of think Subantarctic, obviously it's going to be snowing and it's going to be freezing. Well, actually, it's pretty temperate. We're talking single figures and into the low teens, but we do get some pretty nasty weather, which can be exciting as well. But we have some wonderful, midsummer days in the Subantarctic as well. So I think that's part of the adventure. Not quite knowing what you're going to get as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so our first stop today is the Snares. Now, these are a collection of seriously imposing and hostile, jagged, rocky outcrops. Is this how they got their name?
Yeah, well, I think the name, the Snares, comes from the fact that, they are sort of part of that shipping route, and there would have been a lot of ships going through that area through the 1700s, the 1800s. So they were regarded as a bit of a snare or a bit of a potential issue in terms of sailing. And that's really the history of that name. The other thing being that, sometimes you come across these islands, not just the Snares, but they will be sort of enveloped in cloud and you may not see them until you're literally upon them. So I think the Snares is a very appropriate name. They're a really spectacular group of islands, one big island and then a bunch of smaller islands. So you've got the main island there, which we sort of focus on, but then there's a western chain as well of little islands too. So yeah, a very spectacular place and a wonderful way to kind of start the journey as we head south.
And these are totally uninhabitable, right? But they're home to huge numbers of wildlife. What can we expect to see here? Obviously, we have some penguins here.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see some of the penguins there, and that's obviously a highlight for people. We've got the Snares crested penguins, and we'll talk a wee bit more about them. There is a hut that's on the island, and sometimes as we're moving in the zodiacs around the coastline there, we do sort of spot that little hut where research happens from time to time. But the islands themselves are uninhabited. They've had a little bit of sealing, I believe, way back in time, but very little human impact, even compared to those islands further south. So yeah, this is an island group that's very much unchanged and very pristine, and that's one of the really special things about it. You've got an image there of the Snares Island tomtit, which again, we've got tomtits on the mainland of New Zealand, but this is the endemic subspecies that's found there. So yeah, a very special place.
And almost like a mini seabird capital of the world. I think there's believed to be more seabirds here than on the British Isles.
Yeah, no, I've heard that line given, that I think particularly if you're talking about sooty shearwater or titi, I think we're talking a number of millions, several million of sooty shearwater that are nesting up in the island, that are in their burrows, that breed there, and then they spread out into the Northern Pacific in the non-breeding season. And one of the spectacular things is to see the shearwaters take off in the early morning in huge numbers. So I mean, it's just absolutely crammed, packed full of life. In terms of other wildlife, we've got, as I said, the Snares Island tomtit, which is endemic. Also got a Snares Island fernbird. So you know, you've got some things found there that are not found anywhere else. The penguins themselves, the snare-crested penguin, they're endemic to the Snares, so you won't find them anywhere else on the planet. And that makes it a really special place, a place that's a real privilege to visit, but also a place that's vitally important in terms of preservation of those species.
And obviously some New Zealand fur seals in the mix.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got fur seals cruising around amongst the penguins. I think, you know, we'll talk a wee bit more about this when it comes to the Sub-Antarctic Islands generally, but it's quite overwhelming, I think, when you first come across these islands and you see the volume of wildlife that's there. You know, we're talking tens of thousands of Snares-crested penguins that are on, you know, these relatively small chunks of granite in the middle of the ocean. So yeah, it's a pretty cool thing to experience. And you know, I've had the privilege of being there a number of times now, but I don't think it gets any more special. In fact, I think the anticipation of going there again is a pretty awesome thing. So
starting to wrap up already with these photos, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
There's the opportunity to see some of the first nesting albatross as well. Yeah,
that's right.
Subs.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's one of the things, and you talked earlier about what's special about the Sub-Antarctic Islands, or, you know, what are they, what's special about them. You know, it really is a hot spot for albatross. We've got a number of species that we're going to see as we travel south. And again, these islands are vital spots in terms of breeding for these species. So their preservation, their conservation is vitally important for all of these species.
Excellent. And there's also some unique flora there as well.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of species of what they call the tree daisies. So we've got Olearia lili, which forms the sort of the dominant tree or the dominant forest there on the island. And we've also got the Brachyglottis as well. So two tree daisy species, and they really dominate the landscape in terms of forest. It's not, these islands aren't high, they're only a couple of 100 meters high, but they're dominated by this forest, and then they've got this incredibly thick layer of peat, this very rich peaty soil that is down below this forest. And then we've got some tusky areas as well. The penguins are pretty unique in that they travel up into the forest and actually breed amongst these tree daisies, amongst the bases of the tree daisies. So again, a pretty awesome sight that we get to see from the zodiacs, even though we don't land on the islands themselves.
Which brings us to the next question. So there's no landings here, right? So what is the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, well, I guess we've already talked about the fact that there's an incredibly rich seabirds population on the Snares. So we've got millions of seabirds, and we're talking sooty shearwaters, we're talking diving petrels, other petrel species. We've got our penguins, obviously. So we've got the island itself, which is really a nesting ground for these birds. And if we travelled up into that forest, we'd find that basically the soil is littered with burrows. And if you walked across that soil, you'd literally be falling into burrows or collapsing the soil into these burrows. So, they're very fragile landscapes. I did a bit of work on the Chatham Islands, on Rangatira and Mangere. And when we went into these forests, we actually had to wear these big boards on our boots to spread the weights to increase surface area, and that prevented us from falling through. So you can imagine the impact that 50, 100, 150 people would have if they went traipsing through the forest. So I think, heritage is very much about experiencing the subs, but also acknowledging the fact that we've got very fragile landscapes as well that we need to preserve. And obviously there's things that we're allowed to do and other things that we don't do. So this is a really amazing experience from the Zodiacs. We do really get to feel the flavour of the island, or the island group.
Absolutely, and it looks like it would be quite treacherous even to try and get onto land.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. Now I've got two words for you, Andy: penguin and slide. Now, is this as much fun as it sounds?
Yeah, well, I think again, this is one of those things. The penguin slide or the penguin slope is something that I'd read about, I'd seen images of for many years, and so I know in the Zodiac, coming around the corner on the northern side of the island and coming across this massive granite slope that goes up 70 or 80 metres, just covered in penguins. I mean, I think to answer your question, it exceeds expectation. It's certainly one of the highlights of being on the Snares. It's one of the things that I will always remember, because the first trip I did with Heritage, the first time I worked with them, that was probably, the first big experience I had, and it is mind-blowing. It's incredible. So you've got penguins that are, as you can see there, that are kind of, we've got a bunch here taking a rest, but they'll sort of move up the slope as they're coming up to their nesting sites, and you've got other birds that are on their way down to head off to sea to fish, and it's just this massive kind of runway of activity. And you've got birds that are sort of toppling over and falling into the sea. You've got penguins that are waiting for one to go in before they go in. So it's, again, we spend, hopefully, weather permitting, we spend quite a bit of time just sitting there and just, I guess, soaking it up. It's an incredible experience.
Yeah, and as you were saying, they're all jostling and they're trying to navigate the waves, and they will crash into each other. It can be a little bit comical as well when you're observing them, because they're so upright and erect, but they're walking.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say comical, but at the same time, it's incredible to see their ability to be able to move up the slope and get up the steep granite slope. Yeah. And you think of the effort involved and the energy involved, and yet this is something that they do, right through that breeding season. So, it's an incredible place. And again, as I've said, a real privilege to kind of experience it. And often we'll just sit there, with the Zodiacs and just kind of bobbing in the water and just experiencing it, just lapping it up.
Taking it all in.
Yeah.
So that's us farewelling the Snares now. We're now off to the Auckland Islands, so we get a chance to stretch our legs here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just to kind of put this in perspective, we've probably spent a good chunk of a day travelling to the Auckland Islands. So usually, a good afternoon, evening, overnight, and then we arrive in the morning at the Auckland Islands. And at that point in time, you're kind of ready to stretch your legs. So one of the first stops is often Enderby Island. We'll talk a wee bit more about Enderby Island, but the neat thing about the Auckland Islands is that there's a number of different opportunities to get out and about. And really there's more opportunities that we can take on board in an expedition. And that's one of the neat things that means that every expedition's a wee bit different depending on what we end up doing. There's a bit of human history there that we'll talk about. There's obviously some great wildlife experiences. Again, a very different place to the Snares. And I'll talk about that a lot, that every island kind of has its own feel, its own flavour.
Yeah, so Enderby Island was cleared of pests in 1994, rabbits and mice. So that's not really too long ago. What were they doing there and how were they removed?
Well, I think they were having a great time there. I think that's probably the first thing. They were there, so they were released there as essentially as food for castaways. So the Auckland Islands has quite a history of shipwrecks. So there's been a number of shipwrecks. A number of them are relatively well known. They've been written about, incredible stories of survival, incredible stories of non-survival as well. But after or during this time, the shipwreck time, when there was a lot of ship movement around the area, they did a number of things to try and ensure that if people were marooned on these islands, they'd have the ability to survive. And one of those things was providing them with some food. So releasing rabbits. The rabbits did remarkably well, as rabbits do. But as you say, in the 90s, they went through and they actually released poison. I think they did a helicopter drop and reduced and eliminated the rabbits. And there were other pests on the island as well that were removed as well. My understanding too is they actually removed some of the rabbits live because they'd been there for so long that they were regarded as a rare breed and had some value. So I think there's some sort of progeny that, number of generations on that still exists today.
And so obviously everything has bounced back since they were roaming around and nibbling on megaherbs and the like. Yeah,
and I think that's the remarkable thing about the islands. You see here this boardwalk that through part of the island, and there are a number of boardwalk areas that the Doc's put in. I recall very vividly walking with someone who'd been on the island 15 years previously, and they said the difference was immense in terms of recovery of vegetation. So the vegetation has bounced back incredibly well. Nature's kind of taking over, which I guess, that's the ultimate goal, that we want these places to return to what they were. Enderby is a real wildlife refuge, I guess, too. The main Auckland Islands is not predator-free. So Enderby is a predator-free island, a pest-free island. And there is the hope that Auckland Islands will get there eventually. But it's an incredible experience being on the island. We usually spend a good chunk of a day on the island, and there's a number of opportunities to go for a short walk or go for a medium walk or go for a very long walk. So it just depends on what you feel like. And that's one of the neat things. It's a bit of choice depending on.
And that long walk is almost like a circumnavigation, right? Which is actually an incredible experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's about 12 kilometres. We do circumnavigate pretty much the entire island. And you see real variety in terms of both the landscape and the wildlife as well. We sort of move our way through a number of areas of sea lion or sea lion spots. So it's pretty neat sort of moving through those sea lions areas and learning how to ensure that we give them a wide berth. Here we've got an image of sort of the northern end or the northern side of Enderby with these pretty incredible cliffs. You've got megaherbs in the foreground there. And this is really the first opportunity we get to kind of experience that Sub-Antarctic vegetation kind of in a really intimate way as well.
Yeah. So obviously mega meaning large and herbs, but these plants are related to the mainland, but they've just grown to supersized proportions. Is that correct? Yeah, and so I think it's sort of that island phenomenon where things sometimes get big, and obviously this is a strategy that's worked for the megaherbs. When we remove the pests that aren't there naturally, they're the dominant kind of plant species that we're seeing. Obviously, we've got the tussock grasslands, but we've got just an incredible density of megaherbs here, and there's quite a variety of them too. They've got these big kind of leathery leaves and quite spectacular flowers. I mean, this is a wee bit more subtle here with the green colour, but if you think of, and we may see one later on, the Chlorophyllum speciosum, which is like a purple pink kind of flower, which almost looks out of place. So it's quite spectacular. They do come across as quite otherworldly when you're sort of amongst them. You're on Earth, but maybe like an alternate Earth or something.
No, that's right. No, absolutely. Yeah. And again, these are one of these things that I had heard about, I'd seen photos of, I'd been told about, but when you see them in person, it's pretty neat. Bulbinella rossii, which has got this vivid yellow kind of cylindrical flower head to it. Again, totally different, but yeah, stunning as well. I think one of the things we forget is that we've got a whole invertebrate community as well. So those are vital in terms of the pollination and of these megaherbs as well.
And so
here we've got one of our flightless teals, our Auckland Island flightless teal as well. So another endemic subspecies.
So moving on to the wildlife, Enderby Island, particularly Sandy Bay, offers some front row seats to, like I would describe, a David Attenborough type experience observing Hooker's New Zealand sea lions on the colony down there. What would you say people can expect from this encounter, which is actually on the screen behind you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So there's me. I'm not actually in Sandy Bay at the moment, but I quite like to be. Well, maybe not in July. But I mean, Sandy Bay is an incredible place. It's where we land when we arrive on Enderby Island. So we land in the Zodiacs there. You've got a great image there of a couple of males having a go at each other. It was described to us on a recent trip as more sex and violence than a Tarantino movie. And I think that's a really good description of Sandy Bay. You know, you can see just behind me a wee sort of grassy sort of edge. And we had people from the expedition that sat there for hours simply watching the action. And we've got everything happening. We've got births happening. We've got fights happening. As I said, you know, sex and violence, it's all happening. So, you know, Sandy Bay is a really vital breeding ground for sea lion. Sea lion are one of the rarest seals in the world. I think they number maybe 10,000, 12,000. They're not huge in number. So it's incredible to see, you know, a healthy breeding population. I think they get about 300 or 400 pups a year from Sandy Bay. And there are also other breeding colonies on other parts of the Auckland Islands.
Yeah, I think there's another couple of colonies.
Yeah. I think about 80% of sea lions are found, that's New Zealand sea lions, Hooker sea lions, are found in the Auckland Islands. So again, this area is absolutely vital for that species, absolutely vital.
Yeah, and we also have a few other wildlife on the island as well. Maybe if you can just talk to the photos as I sort of flick through them there.
Yeah, so we've got, and actually you can see the Bulbinella rossii on the left here, so the flower on the left, so that's just finishing flowering, so that's one of our megaherbs, and our dotterel as well. And so here we've got our snipe, so our Auckland Island snipe, which is one of these birds that we hope to see when we're on the island. So, you know, they're part of the sandpiper family, and they're a little bit cryptic, a little bit, they'll tend not to come out and say hello to you, whereas we've got lots of species that will do that, but they tend to get flushed out as we move along the tracks and as we move around the island. So
and there's another chance to see a Sub-Antarctic snipe as well on Campbell Island, right?
Yeah, that's right. So on Campbell Island as well. So you get a second chance. And one of my favourite birds, so the light-mantled sooty albatross. So as we move around the Auckland Islands and we move around, as we circumnavigate it, Enderby Island, at the northern end there's these big cliffs, and there's the opportunity just to sit and watch the albatross as they soar. And this light-mantled sooty albatross, which is a species that we'll see right through the Sub-Antarctic Islands, again, I think it's one of the most stunning birds just in terms of its coloration. And they're a wee bit more solitary. They don't breed in big, dense colonies. They tend to be nesting sort of individually along the cliffs, but a pretty awesome experience seeing them. They
are actually incredibly attractive birds. So they're like the Cindy Crawford of the albatross world.
Yeah, that's right. Or Al McPherson, depending on, you know, what your liking is. Incredibly photogenic as well, you know, as are the Southern Royal Albatross, and we've got one here, and we see those as we move through Enderby Island as well. So there's a boardwalk that essentially goes through the middle of the island, and we've got Southern Royals that are sort of dotted around the landscape, just nesting amongst the vegetation. So it's an opportunity to get some pretty awesome close-up experiences with them as well.
Absolutely. and also penguins.
Yeah, and I think for Enderby, probably not rockhoppers, but probably our yellow-eyes would be our sort of target species when it comes to Enderby, and I think we're probably going to see some photo. Here they go. So yellow-eyed penguins, I mean, many people will know that they're a penguin that's really under threat, particularly on mainland New Zealand. There's a bit of talk, or quite a lot of talk, that they could be extinct on the mainland in the relatively near future, which is obviously a pretty tragic thing. And there's a lot of work going into trying to preserve and conserve yellow-eyed penguins on the mainland. But on Enderby Island, it's a really awesome opportunity to see, a pretty thriving population. And I think the Auckland Islands generally has 40 or 50% of the yellow-eyed penguin species in terms of numbers. So again, a vital area in terms of preservation of them. They're a very different penguin in terms of how they operate in relation to humans. They are very easily spooked and very easily scared. So we're really careful that we give them their space, that we don't move towards them, that we sort of respect the fact that this is their patch, we're on their island, we're the visitors. So, but it's an incredibly special thing to be able to see them up close.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a bit of a penguin, a hoi-ho crossing as you get up, and after you land at Sandy Bay, and you sort of have to give way and watch them come down or go up the hill, and then sort of navigate all the action on the beach and then into the water.
Yeah, that's right. I think it really sets the precedent for the trip in terms of saying that nature comes first. And we get to observe and watch and experience, and that's wonderful. So, yeah, I mean, the good thing is that we see a huge number of them on the island. So it's not as if we're in a situation where we've got our one penguin opportunity, and, we do get to experience, these birds in their natural environment in really good numbers.
Excellent. And there's also a bit of sightseeing to be done.
Yeah, so I think, if I've got it right, I think we're in Musgrave Harbour there, which is on the main Auckland Islands. And this is one of the really special spots to go on the Zodiac from the harbour and then into a cave, and then it opens up and there you go. There's the aerial view with the Zodiac doing the rounds. So some really special spots like that. And again, it's one of those places where you go there the first time and you're wowed, you go there another time and it's still pretty incredible.
Absolutely. And there's also some interesting human history attached to the Auckland Islands as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so what we're seeing there is a graveyard, which is an odd thing to see on an uninhabited island. But in the 1850s, I think it was, the idea was made to set up a settlement, and they named it Hardwick. It was going to be it was focused around whaling, but the idea was to have a whole community there. So I think it was 60-something individuals, men, women, and children, went down there with the sort of the dream and the promise that they were going to this incredible sort of paradise. And I think we all think it's paradise when we're there, but we get to go back to the ship and have lunch. So that's a little bit nicer. They were there for 2.5 years. It was real hardship. There were all sorts of issues. There was a prison they had to create on one of the islands to deal with some of the problems, issues growing crops, issues raising livestock. It really was a real failed attempt, and a really tragic sort of situation in lots of ways. One of the really tough things when you go to the cemetery is there's one gravestone that's made from a millstone, and it was made by the father of an infant, Isabel Younger, I think her name was, and she died obviously as an infant, and the millstone would have been, the idea would be to use that, on the grain that obviously was going to grow wonderfully. That never happened. So it was used as a tombstone, as a gravestone. So all that remains now is the cemetery. And then we do walk along where the buildings would have been. There were 20+ buildings that were all dismantled and returned back to Sydney. So yeah, incredible history.
Yeah, and also a bit of shipwrecking as well.
Yeah, so as we sort of talked about, the subs have been notorious for shipwrecks. What we've got here is the remains of the Grafton, which, and this is down in Carnley Harbour, down in the south. So the Grafton was a ship that went down to Campbell looking for tin, for sealing, relatively unsuccessful, came back to Carnley and got grounded there with 5 individuals on board. They managed to build a hut, they managed to make a forge, they managed to survive, they managed to do that despite the fact that they spoke different languages. Incredible story of survival. And I think it was 2 years, maybe 2 and a bit years, before their rescue, which involved 3 of them actually sailing a boat that they'd built from what they had, sailing back to Stewart Island, and then sending another boat south to rescue the other 2. Incredible survival under extreme conditions.
That was like the ultimate survivor.
Yeah.
But without the cameras and the,
No, that's right.
any chance of comfort, right?
Yeah. And I think the other thing to remember is that at the same time, there was another shipwreck on the west coast, which had the opposite kind of result. 3 out of 25, I think, survived, and no leadership, and really an interesting story about how you approach adversity can really have an impact on the outcome.
Absolutely. And here's some ancient graffiti.
Yeah, so obviously with the history of shipwrecks, there was a lot of effort made to try and
life if people were trapped there, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's all sorts of things still on the island that are a memory of that. So we've got these finger posts that point to actually depots with supplies, or would have had supplies. And I'm trying to remember the name of the tree, and I'm forgetting this one here. You might be able to help me, Isaac. So Victoria tree, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. So again, with a message on it about, and it has a whole inscription on it, but that's to do with, the castaways that might find themselves on these islands. So yeah, a real effort made to try and provide for those that might find themselves shipwrecked on the Auckland Islands, as well as Campbell as well.
And there's also some coast watcher history there from World War II.
Yeah, so in World War II, there was concern that the subs might be seen as a base for sort of, enemy ships and enemy troops. So New Zealand decided they would send men down, and they would have some huts posted on the Auckland Islands and also on Campbell Island. And they would essentially sit in those huts, and they would watch for all these enemy ships that would obviously turn up at some point. I think it lasted for, I think it was 5 years, 4 or 5 years. They watched from sort of 6:30 in the morning, might have even been earlier, right through the evening. They obviously rotated that. No enemy ships were seen during that entire time. But there was some incredible science that was done. And I think that's the flip side of it, that while, they didn't have any success in spotting enemy ships, which is probably a good thing, they did some incredible science and actually some very well-known scientists that were part of those crews that actually spent time down there.
For sure. So another predatory-free island, in addition to Enderby, is Campbell Island, our next stop on our Sub-Antarctic island hop. This is another failed attempt at farming. What were these people thinking?
Well, I don't know if they were thinking too hard, or whether, again, I think it's a really good example of sort of being sold a bit of a lie, or being promised something that wasn't really ever going to be successful. So I think it ended up having about 25 years of farming from the late 1800s through the early 1900s. And I think at its peak, there was something like 7,000 sheep on the island, as well as cattle. And it was never economic. So I think it was essentially, a real life of hardship. Real efforts were made to try and make it work. The sheep were obviously being produced for wool, for meat, but it never really worked. So that was, right at the end of the 19th century, right to the early 1900s. So I think 1931, the lease was kind of expired and was never looked at again.
And for good reason. And this is another example of an island bouncing back post-farming and now predator-free. How's it doing now?
Yeah, well, I think, again, like you say, it's bouncing back. It's doing incredibly well. You still see the signs of the history. So you still see the fence lines, for example, that were obviously used for the sheep and the cattle. But the wildlife is taking over. The vegetation is taking over. The megaherbs are taking over. The albatross are doing incredibly well. It was made a reserve in 1954. The sheep and the cattle were removed in the 70s and the 80s. They had rats, they had cats, other pests. An incredible story of eradication with the rats. That was done in 2001 with helicopters. They had 4 helicopters. They dropped tons of poison. I'm not sure on the exact number. They did that all over 1 month, and they basically just, blasted the island and got rid of all the rats. And I think at that point in time, it was one of the largest rats island eradication programs. So, it is, as you say, it's pest-free now, and the wildlife is really bouncing back.
And it sort of gives hope to New Zealand becoming predator-free one day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And predator-free 2050, a big focus for New Zealand. The Auckland Island, the main Auckland Islands, was going to be the next sort of testing ground for that. That was put on hold with COVID, but I think there's a real hope that, the cats, the pigs, the mice that are on the Auckland Islands, that might be, that next sort of push forward in terms of predator-free.
So this is another island where there's some more walking, wilderness and wildlife, and some amazing southern royal albatross encounters. This is a pretty special island, right?
Oh, incredibly special. And as I said in the intro, I mean, this is the last 3 Christmas days for me, so it's a very special place for me. An incredible place. It's really the hot spot for the southern royal albatross. I think, a huge percentage of the breeding pairs are found on Campbell Island. It is a real opportunity to get out and about as well. So there's a couple of really neat walking opportunities. One of them is a boardwalk up sort of 3 Ks up to a high point. And as you're walking up, you're just surrounded by megaherbs. And you're surrounded, dotted around the land. And here we've got Pleurophyllum speciosum, the one I was talking about, one of my favorites. But you're surrounded by albatross, sort of dotted around the hillsides. And, the neat thing too is that they don't seem to worry too much about you, which is really neat. Obviously, we do the right thing in terms of distance. But again, these are just incredible birds. We watch them fly overhead. We see the young birds sort of gamming as they're interacting and socializing and displaying and learning how to be adults. And there's been some incredible experiences there. It's a little bit like the sea lions, and we can just sit and just soak it up and see nature for what it is, and see nature in a really pristine form. And here we've got our snipe again. Yes, and we've had a number of birders who they've got their list and they want to get their birds, and the snipe is one. If it knows that you're after it, it'll definitely make sure that you don't see it. Everyone else will see it, but you won't see it. So just an incredible island in terms of the diversity of animal life, but also of plant life as well.
Yeah, incredible wildlife there. And before, when you're talking to the albatross, just to sit there and sort of be amongst it and just observe everything taking place in front of your eyes is quite an unreal experience.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think we have, I think a number of people, get very emotional about it, because it's an incredibly special experience, and you do feel very privileged. And I think, one of the things here is these trips are all about experiencing and privilege, but also I think about going back and being ambassadors for these places, because these are part of New Zealand. This is part of our land, So here we've got a view from, I think this is the Northwest Bay Walk, which is a longer walk that you can do. It's again an option, but that's sort of a full day, 7 or 8 hours. Really, you're very much amongst it, and it's off the beaten track. It's a really neat experience. So we have our giant petrels as well. So they're pretty awesome birds, and everyone's in love with the albatross, but I like to be an advocate for giant petrels and skua, kind of the ones that do tend to get a bit of a bad rap. They're a bit nastier, but a lot of character, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, they quite often they'll be nesting very close to the boardwalk, so you'll have to detour around them, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and again, that's that awareness of, we are the visitors, and we need to be aware of the wildlife. There's times when we've just had to stop and wait. We had a time in Enderby where a penguin was on the boardwalk. We just wait, and again, you just enjoy that, but you allow the wildlife to do what it needs to do. This is the Coal Isle walk that we're seeing there, which is the boardwalk on Campbell, which goes up to that high points, giving you a great sort of vista. And in the background there on the left, you've got Mount Honey, which is the high points of Campbell Island, which again is often an option for a bit of a walk. Well, a bit more than a bit of a walk. It's quite a good strenuous walk. So here we've got the Campbell Island teal, flightless teal. We had the Auckland Island subspecies. This is the Campbell Island subspecies. And we find them kind of just in the shallows around the wee bays there.
And this is a species that came back after the eradication was complete.
Yeah, I think if I recall rightly, I think this was on one of the offshore islands not on the main Campbell Island. And it was actually a bit of a breeding program to get the numbers back up and then reintroduced onto main Campbell. And we regularly see them. So they're not in massive numbers, but they're there and we see them. And again, they're a beautiful bird and a real privilege to kind of see, this endemic subspecies.
Yeah, I think like the snipe, I think they sought refuge on Dent Island, I think it is. It's like the shark tooth sticking off the northwest.
Yeah,
Bay.
Dent or Jacquemas, and I think they were then, so the snipe were then, they were discovered and then reintroduced back onto the main Auckland Island, main Campbell Island as well. So here we're looking down from Coal Isle, I think it is, or maybe from the Northwest Bay Walk. And we're looking down through the megaherb sort of fields. We've got Bulbinella rossii and the Pleurophyllum speciosum. And I think we're looking back to Jacquemas Island, I think it is, down in the south. So quite a rugged landscape, volcanic landscape, but stunning landscape.
And also home to the world's loneliest tree.
Yeah, so a bit of an oddity. You'll notice that there's we've got the trees on Auckland Islands, the rata trees, but here, the tallest stuff we have is Dracophyllum. So we've got this introduced Sitka spruce, a little bit of conjecture as to who planted it and when they planted it. So talk that it was Lord Rutherford who planted it in the early 1900s, but there's been a wee bit of debate in terms of whether that matches with the age of the tree, but they call it the loneliest tree. It's 400 plus kilometers from its nearest sort of, tree friend. So it, I guess by definition, that makes it the world's loneliest tree. Apparently the top's been chopped off a number of times, or was way back in time, as a Christmas tree for the Mets, the meteorological hut that was manned over a number of years. So that's one of the reasons that it sort of doesn't quite have the shape of what we would expect for a Sitka.
Yeah, quite shrubby.
Yeah.
They needed that Christmas tree. Okay, and which takes us to our final stop today, magnificent Macquarie Island. You touched on it a little bit earlier. So this is like, I guess, the Pavlova crowded house far lap of the Sub-Antarctic Islands. Geographically Kiwi, politically Aussie. It's an amazing island, and it had a bit of a hard start with a grim human history, courtesy of one Invercargill Mayor, Mr. Joseph Hatch.
Yeah, I mean, an incredible place, and like you say, it is really the Pavlova. I think we like to sort of claim it and feel like it's ours, but it definitely has an Aussie feel when you're there. There are Australians manning the base down there, so you get the Aussie accent when you turn up if you have a chat to them. But just, you can see here just an incredible density of particularly the penguins, the elephant seals, both king penguins and royal penguins, as well as gentoo and rockhopper. Quite overwhelming. Just again, an incredible place to visit. What you've got there is these massive vats or digesters that were part of the oil business that Joseph Hatch set up in the late 1800s, and his idea was, we've got all these elephant seals, all these penguins. Well, that's an incredible supply of oil. So we'll just sort of kill them, chuck them in the digesters, and then churn out the oil. I think they killed something like 2 million penguins over, might have been 20 years, sort of decimated, particularly the king penguin population. At one point, they were processing 2,000 royal penguins a day to make oil. And I think the oil ended up being for rope and for twine. I mean, they started with elephant seals and then sort of shifted onto penguins. A pretty morbid history, and we sort of see the remnants of that. But what we also see is the recovery of these populations, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's amazing to see this when you're there, like the impact of these rusting, hulking digesters, which almost push these species to brink of extinction, just absolutely inundated by wildlife rebounding.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Despite the annihilation, and to quote Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, life finds a way. So let's talk about Macquarie Island now.
Yeah, so Macquarie Island, again, it's an island that has had a history of, both, the history of the oil business with the penguins and the elephant seals, but also in association with that, we've had pests, etc. on the island. They've been eradicated, and a massive project to get rid of the rabbits, and we've now got an island that is really rebounding. I think the penguin numbers, the king penguin numbers are in the hundreds of thousands. It's one of the bigger populations on the globe. The royal penguins are endemic. They're only found there. And there's one colony at the southern end that I think is something like 600,000 birds in one colony at Herd Point. Just incredible. We don't land on Herd Point, but we can cruise around there, and just to see that density of birds is incredible. We tend to land on Sandy Bay, another Sandy Bay, which is home to king penguins. Here they are, the second biggest penguin, as well as royal penguins. You've got a population, or you've got wildlife that doesn't care about you. What actually cares about you, because they want to, you've arrived and they want to find out about you. So they'll come up to you like this royal penguin is doing. And really, you don't need to go towards the birds. They will come towards you. It's just, again, another incredible privilege being there. Here we've got a royal penguin population, or a breeding area, and they tend to breed not on the beach, but a little bit higher up. So we walk up to a wee platform and observe them breeding. Again, just stunning birds, and stunning to have this density and to have them in these numbers.
Absolutely. And what the pictures don't convey is the multi-sensory experience.
Yeah.
Visiting these colonies and seeing them in action. There's just so much life, noise, fragrance.
Yeah, that's right. I think fragrance is probably a good way of putting it. Just incredible. And you just want to stay and linger, I think. It's very cool. And the gentoos as well, being able to see just this diversity of penguin life, not just numbers, but the number of species that you're seeing as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a penguin paradise.
Yeah.
And what about all those weaners?
Yeah, so we've got obviously elephant seals in really big numbers on Macquarie. They are decreasing a little bit, but I think the numbers are still really high. The weaners are these very plump young pups, or old pups, I guess, pups that have stopped feeding on mum and are just sort of hanging out on the beach. And, they're looking incredibly cute as that one is there. It's quite hard to take a bad photo of them. They're just incredibly photogenic, largely due to their incredible fat reserves and their eyes that sort of look at you longingly, wondering if you've got any milk for them. So they will sort of advance towards you and, suckle on your knee, or, just incredible. And those weaners sort of hang out in groups. Eventually they'll start to sort of make these forays out into the ocean. And if they're lucky, they'll evade the killer whales that are out there waiting for them too. So I think they go from about 50 kilos to about 150 kilos in not too many weeks, just with that milk that's going into them before they're weaned.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, that cuteness doesn't last though, does it?
Well, I guess it depends on who you are, and I'm sure someone finds them cute, but we do have these large male elephant seals. We've obviously got the sort of the beach masters that have their harems, and you've got all these interactions going on. A little bit like the sea lions on Sandy Bay and Enderby. There's always stuff happening. And even seeing them lounge around and kind of flick sand onto their backs, it's just a really neat wildlife experience. I'm sure someone finds them beautiful.
Yeah,
there you go. Yeah,
the power and just the sheer size and being in their presence is quite incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking several tons. Those males, they are big animals, the southern elephant seals. So yeah, just an incredible sight, really. And there you've got a sort of a typical landing, or one of our typical landings, coming off the ship and landing in the Zodiacs. And often as you come into shore, you'll have penguins kind of coming in with you, kind of going, what's going on here, checking you out. So yeah.
The king penguins have quite a distinctive call. It almost sounds electronic.
Yeah, that's right. And when you see them with their flippers out and their heads up, sort of trumpeting, it's quite incredible.
There's some more, a mix of some wieners and some larger elephant seals.
Yeah.
What they turn into. There is also an active research station here as well.
Yeah, so I think that's been going, I think it's since the late 40s. So the Enderby base, which is the Australian base, and it's manned throughout the year. So I think there's between 20 and 40 individuals that are at the base. They do all sorts of research. They have huts dotted around the island. So there's various huts that they can go to if they're doing research. And during COVID, it's not a place that we go on to, but it's certainly, we do sort of see the base and see that there's active science going on there, atmospheric work, geological work, obviously conservation work, etc. that happens. It was actually Mawson that set up, Douglas Mawson, who set up sort of the first sort of base there way back in the early 1900s. So there's an incredible history too in terms of presence on Macquarie Island as well.
And guests get to travel with a pretty impressive expedition team like yourself. What sort of mix do we have on board?
I guess one of the really key things is to try and recognise the fact that there are lots of different aspects to the Sub-Antarctic Islands. It's not just about the birds. It's not just about the megaherbs. There's the history. There's those that are really keen in photography. So we try and develop a team of individuals, or have a team of individuals that kind of covers lots of those areas. So, botanists, real birders that are really good at identifying their birds, those that have been involved in research. We have photographers on board that can be a real help to those that are trying to hone their photography skills and get those, images that, once in a lifetime images. We've got individuals on our team that have spent time on these islands. So they're really, not just with heritage, but also having done research on these islands. So you've got a real wealth of experience in terms of the team that comes down with you. And I think ultimately you've got a bunch of individuals that feel really passionate about these places, that feel really, that have a real link to these places and really care about not just the experiences that we have, but the conservation and the preservation of these amazing islands and this amazing part of the world.
Absolutely. I think one of the things is with our team, the natural history of these islands is brought to life, pre, during, while you're experiencing it. All the history, it's all rolled into one. And you were saying it is quite an emotional experience, and you do get very protective and attached to these islands. So it's amazing that we can create these ambassadors that can then go out into the world and share these special places and why they need to be protected.
Yep.
Final question for you, until we get to the guest the guest questions. What are you looking forward to most about going back this summer?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love going back to the places I've been to. As I said, they don't the beauty and the impact of them doesn't wear off. But I think the other side of it is I I really enjoy the fact that every trip is different and you don't know what's going to come your way. And I really enjoy the special nature of every trip. So I enjoy looking forward to a trip going, I wonder what special things we're going to experience. You know, we had an aurora in the middle of the night and the whole ship got woken up at 2 a.m. or 1 a.m. You know, that was an incredibly unique experience. You know, it may happen again, it may not, but that's what I really love. Just the fact that it's not a trip that's out of the can. You know, every trip is unique and special. Absolutely,
and that is the one of the many joys of joining an authentic expedition cruise to a remarkable place. Well, cheers, Andy, and thank you very much for sharing your incredible adventures and research and enthusiasm for these amazing islands. If you'd like to join us in the subs this summer, our season starts on 25 November with voyages from 8 to 28 days. The 28-day one does go all the way down to the heart of Antarctica at the Ross Sea, but it also touches on these islands, and I believe Andy will be on the first one in January. Okay, we will look over to the questions now. Are you ready for the third degree?
Yeah, I think I'm ready. We'll see, I guess.
We have lots of nice feedback and one question so far.
Easy.
So this is from Ivor Harris, and it's about respecting wildlife. Obviously, we go down there and we maintain the distance between the animals. He's asking, how do you manage the situation when the wildlife approaches us and people that take photos when they're close to the animals and they end up on social media?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good point. And I think one of the things is that wildlife will approach you. And I've talked about Macquarie Island, where wildlife does tend to come towards you. You know, one of the things, and we talk about this particularly on the Auckland Islands with the sea lions who will come towards you, and that can be a bit of an issue. So we educate our passengers around what to do and what's appropriate in those situations. We also make sure that we don't have passengers going off on their own. So you're always with staff who are knowledgeable and informed around appropriate practice. So I think, you know, we're always there to ensure that we are being respectful and we're doing the right thing in terms of wildlife.
Absolutely. We don't have any more questions. There is Fran Solly is going to be joining us. She's coming down to Antarctica, so we look forward to seeing you, Fran. Okay, that is a wrap. Thank you so much for your time, Andy. Awesome to have you with us. And I hope you enjoyed being part of the Heritage Live discussion. I hope everyone out there looks forward to the next one, which will be next month, and that will be with Kate Sutherland, who did some research on some of our voyages last summer as well. So until then, safe travels. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks.